Okay, folks, let's get started this afternoon. Thanks for coming in to this session. And today, this afternoon, in terms of a theme, it'll be TWLTLs, or two-way left turn lanes, and what to do about them, and how we deal with them, safety standpoint, and so on. So our first speaker is Chris Cunningham, and he's with ITRE at North Carolina State University. And he's going to say, he serves on the committee with me, and he's going to say a couple of things about himself as he gets started. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you for coming. Evidently, my bio got lost in the transmission. But my name is Chris Cunningham. I'm a Director of Highway Systems at ITRE, Institute for Transportation Research and Education. I also handle research coordination. I really dabble in a lot of different things. I wouldn't say access management is necessarily my specialty, but I see the importance of it. And I am involved in several committees, including access management, and even at the local level, NIC side I'm heavily involved in with North Carolina State. So this presentation is on economic effects of access management. So we're looking at the business impacts. If you've ever tried to consider business impacts and look at some of the data that's available, you understand the hardships. And so I'm going to talk through a little bit about that, how we handled it. This project's about 8 years old, so I may interject a few things we've learned since the fact, because this is literally a copy-paste from an older presentation, so I may throw in a few add-ons. This was done in conjunction with UNC's Highway Safety Research Center, so I want to make sure I acknowledge them also. So the objective was, as I said earlier, determine the economic effects of access management techniques, mainly medians, on business adjacent to multi-lane highways. So just a quick perusal through the literature, at least at the time that I put this together. NCDOT specific, when we talk about safety, median divided sites were generally safer than two-way left turn lanes. That's a very general statement. There was some basic research done at NCDOT at the time. Since that time, we've actually done some safety analysis of superstreets, which is a type of median divided facility, and we found that at rural sites we've seen 70% reduction in collisions, and at urban sites we've seen about 45%, I believe. And so we're seeing the impact of putting in median design facilities, and that's why you're seeing the push, not just at our state, but at other states, to look at median divided facilities, and we're willing to put up the fight for them. There's other national sources that find similar results. From an operations standpoint, the main thing at the time we completed this project was saturation flow, just an entry, and it's basically the beginning of the calculations for capacity. So we see a slight reduction in capacity for our movements, but if you look at the intersection as a whole, especially along the main line, we tend to get better efficiency along the main line, and we see some reductions in the side street traffic as they're having to go a little bit either way, but not in all cases. It really depends on how you're dividing that facility up. Now, when we look at economic effects, there's many different types of study methods that could be deployed. There's 4 that we basically summarized here, with the bulk of those done in perception-based studies, because what happens in research, when we try to do before and after, we are too late to get the before. And so a lot of times you have to find a similar site nearby to kind of get your pseudo, what would your perception be if we did do this, and use that as your before case. So there's perception-based studies, and then, of course, survey-based before and after, or some mix of the two. And then there's always predictive modeling. And I'll talk a little bit about our desire, obviously, to get empirical data, if at all possible, and the roadblocks we hit, and we're not the only ones that have hit them. But again, survey-based methods represent the overwhelming majority. And so just really quickly, a summary of some of the studies at the time of this project. Iowa, Florida, Texas, and Washington were the primary places we were looking. And kind of blue representing no effect or positive, we think of those in the same light. We don't want to cause some negative impact. And then red, kind of a negative impact. And there were several studies that were done here, but I really like the Texas study because it talks about customers at specific types of locations, such as gas stations, fast food, and it does a little bit of a breakdown. here. But you see most of the effects were positive to no effect, but there were some ill effects, especially what we're thinking at the time of this project when we're doing a literature review at the local level. When you look at some of those gas station impacts, those local business owners, if you were in the presentation yesterday with the gentleman, was it Quick Stop? Quick Trip, thank you. You know, the ones that are local, especially the one-owner businesses, he mentioned that yesterday too, they're the ones that are going to tend, that's their livelihood. They're the ones that are going to tend to throw their arms up in the air the fastest. Some of the factual-based studies, so you'll see, you know, roughly it seems to be a wash. So if you look here in Georgia, the increase in sales was somewhere between X and X percent, but it's basically about the same thing for a decrease, so that tends to be a wash. You're seeing the study corridors turnover here in Minnesota of about 8% turnover, but statewide is 10%. So it seems to be a wash is what we're kind of seeing when you look at sites versus the overall trend. So nothing really stands out that shows major negative or major positive. So what we did is we tried to go down the road of getting factual data as much as possible. What can we get our hands on? And so we went and looked at EDIS sales data. We wanted to look at actual sales data before and after. If you've ever tried to do this, we learned it as we went. But if you've ever tried to do this, you learn really quickly that they don't have a lot of factual data. So here in green, this is a pilot corridor. If you're from the North Carolina area, I'm an NC State grad and I work at NC State, so Western Boulevard was one of these before and after scenarios. It was going to be our first pilot. Let's test it. We went and collected data, and only 3 of these companies here actually have actual sales data. The rest is predicted. Well, we can't really use that for before and after. The numbers, in a lot of cases, when you look at them over time, just stay exactly the same. It doesn't tell us anything. And so, unfortunately, we weren't able to, just like other states that have had this issue, look at sales data, revenue-based data, or anything to that effect. So we knew we were going to have to use a qualitative method. And so we really wanted to look at a survey-based method. We felt that that was still going to give us some data per se, even though it was qualitative. And we wanted to make sure we carefully developed those surveys. And so most of the results that I showed you up there were based on some survey-based data. And we talked to, I think it was Bill Frawley at TTI and a couple others, Bill Isley, I think also, and a couple others to kind of get a sense of what their surveys look like, what types of things did they ask, how did they develop the survey, and why were they developing that in such a way. So in our case, because lack of a little bit of forethought on our team and NCDOT, we had to use perception-based studies. All the sites that we were going to get in our 2-year study, for the most part, were already developed. And so we didn't have any before data set. We did not go out and collect surveys beforehand. And so perception-based, and I'll explain that in just a second. And then what are the end users' questions that NCDOT and business want answered? That was really important to us. DOT, just like your DOTs that you work with, you go to the public meeting and you pretty much know before you get there who's gonna be there, right? You know who the advocates are going to be. You know if this is going to be a business that's going to come out. And in this case, medians really, you're going to have the business owners out there for sure in full force. And they're going to be talking to each other. The survey is twofold in this case. The first page of our survey, we didn't want to bias them in any way. We didn't really tell them why we were there. Okay, we wanted to, it was really more of a gauge of their economic impacts. We knew we were going into a recession. We didn't want to see a downturn being played as, well, that was the impact of the median. And so we wanted to use the pseudo before, or the perception-based study at the comparison site, and the actual after site that we collected data at to kind of look at what was your perception of the economic conditions leading into it. So we didn't tell them why we were there. We didn't say we're going to talk about the median outside your office, none of those things. So it's kind of acting as a control. And then the second page, we really told them why we were there. Okay, we're going to talk about the median outside, or we're going to talk about the median that's a mile down the road. What if that were in front of your facility? What do you think? That would be the comparison site. What do you think would happen? So in all, 62 sites were considered. They had to have a median, fairly recently constructed within the last 4 or 5 years at most. We wanted to make sure that it was fresh in their mind. We wanted to make sure that they knew a little bit about the site, at least a quarter mile in length with good business density. We didn't want something where this gas station was the only one in that area and then other gas stations came in, because then that could impact their business, and that wouldn't necessarily be the impact of the median installation with moderately high traffic volume. So just an example, anybody been to Wilmington before? Wilmington, North Carolina? Main Street in Wilmington, one of the main streets in Wilmington is Market Street. It has a very high density. It's a very heavy tourist area. This is one of the main streets for sure in Wilmington. And you see the density, it's very well built out. We weren't worried about another gas station coming in and that, the sheets running the other gas station out of business, things like that. And you get a sense of kind of what the median divided facility looked like along that site. And then literally just adjacent to it, that was a half-mile segment. We did another half-mile segment just adjacent to it where no median installation was in place. And so this median really came into play when Walmart came over here. So they really had to control what was going on this site. It was getting ready to be a mess with the 5-lane section. So we have a 5-lane section next to a median section, and then we use the 5-lane section. They obviously remember when the median was put in, it's just adjacent to it, and we say, what if we were to put a median in, just like the one you have over here, what would your perception be of X, Y, and Z? And so we use that as kind of our before data set. Is everybody with me? Okay. So we have 634, I think it's 644 actually, bad math, non-vacant records. So we did have some vacancies, obviously, in some of the businesses in the survey database. And you see a fairly good representation of comparison and treatment. It's pretty equal. And 155 vacant. Now, really, that sounds high, but it's actually not. If you go look at the literature, it's not as bad as you think it is. And then you'll see we have a pretty good representation across different NAICS codes here, so different business types. So we felt like we had been pretty successful in trying to represent the population. So if we dip into some of those findings, when we asked about business revenues related to the raised median, comparison treatment sites had similar findings. So this is kind of that first page. Okay, you'll see here no change or up is about the same, 50% versus 50-50. So we're seeing that the populations are saying that revenue is impacted by the economy fairly equal here. So we don't see any bias here whatsoever, but you do see a little more impact at the local level, it seems. And so if you look at the local one location and the local multiple locations, you'll see that the impact of revenue seems to be a little bit different than if you had looked at the regional or national. So then when we asked them why, they think they are seeing decreased revenue. Again, no bias. Okay, the overwhelming majority said the economy. So before we said anything about the median, okay, we did not bias them in any way, they said the economy. And so if you look at that local, multiple, local, one location, et cetera, you see fairly consistent results. And business turnover was one we wanted to look at also. So what we saw in the literature is that there appears to be some reason that there's some more local resistance. There's local one-owner shops or that new business that's trying to get on their feet. And we wanted to try and get a good understanding of that and be able to explain it. And so what we actually did is we looked at vacant business, but we also looked at new turnover. So we looked at vacant businesses alone. There's nobody there at all. What percentage does that look like? And then vacant and new turnover together, because new turnover would indicate that someone's infield. Okay, somebody was teetering when construction was going on. Think about it like that. Okay, we all have those business owners. They come in, they go to do construction, and they just can't weather the construction period because they were already teetering. Okay, they leave, and then somebody infills. That kind of shows that there was some good impact. They just couldn't weather that storm. That's one of the findings actually we had in the study. So when we look at vacant and new turnover together, you'll see that the treatment sites tended to have a little more turnover, if you will. Okay, about 6% more. So something's going on there related to probably the construction is what we think it was. There's about 6% that just don't weather the construction. Because when you look at just vacant by itself, we literally have pretty much the exact same percent for comparison and treatment, 15% vacant business before and after. So we think there's that 6% is most likely just not being able to weather that construction period. So going to the second page, would you, and for the comparison site, we would ask, would you be in favor of a raised median to increase safety? So now we've told them, if you were to put a raised median here, would you be in favor of it for safety? And then for the after sites where the median was in place, we said, now that you've got one in place, do you think that you like them? Does it make them more safe? And so I've covered up my text there, but the tendency is definitely negative reaction by businesses, especially those local and multiple locations. Just the thought of putting a median in there is not very well received. But you do see some change of heart in that after period. Okay, some people that would not have been in favor, let's do it this way, that had a negative bias before the median was put in place, it went down. And so there are people that kind of had a change of heart. They said, I actually did see some safety improvements here, and I'll acknowledge that, is what they were saying. So then we looked at ranking of customer considerations. So give me a rank in rank order from 1 to 6. Tell me what number one factor, number two factor do you consider to bring customers in? So what is it that bring your customers in? And so we said rank, accessibility, customer service, the distance to travel, your product quality, all of those things, rank them in order from 1 to 6, with 1 being most important. And so what we saw, okay, accessibility was certainly important. Okay, I don't want to ignore that. But what you saw is about 60%, okay, in that before period, we're saying that accessibility ranks 4th, 5th, or 6th actually in priority of what I consider. There are other things that are more important than accessibility. Not that it isn't important. There were certainly some that ranked it fairly high. Okay, but there was a fair majority saying, this kind of falls off. It's not the most important. And then what is the impact of raised medians on business-related attributes? So when we think about the raised median in terms of congestion, safety, number of customers per day, property value, site access, and then delivery convenience, this is a big one for trucks. How important, or do you think it actually, the median would make it better in the comparison site case, and in the treatment site case, does make it better, same or worse? And so the treatment site showed some improved perception versus the comparison, similar to the slide two slides before. You see some improvement. Okay, we went from 16% saying this is going to make congestion better or keep it the same. This is the same. So there was about a 14% jump after the fact when they actually saw the median. They said, I'm willing to acknowledge some of people were willing to acknowledge I did see a change in congestion. And from a safety percent, if we look at these better in the same together, it's roughly about the same. And then you can kind of go down the list here for delivery convenience. Now, one thing I want to acknowledge really quickly, you might have noticed we excluded what we call sites 3 and 4. This is actually a site, Tony probably remembers this from years ago. This was a site, I believe, in the Charlotte area where they came in and almost overnight they slapped a skinny concrete median down from I can't think of what the word is for these, but basically a high-speed, it wasn't interstate, but it was a fairly high-speed U.S. highway, and brought it into a signal. So they're reducing the speed very quickly, coming into a signal into Charlotte. And they wanted to remove some of the access issues they were having for the twiddle that was in place right there. So they slapped the median in, but the U-turn, the nearest U-turn on one side, one was at the signal on the arterial, but the other one was at an interchange about 2 miles away. And so that's a really unique access management treatment, which boy, the survey results from that one were definitely an outlier, and there was a lot of outrage about that one. And boy, they did not like that it happened overnight without a whole lot of input. And so we excluded that one on purpose because it was an outlier, but lesson learned, don't make somebody go 2 hours or 2 miles away to go do a U-turn at an interchange and expect that to be your access management treatment. There were lots of business closures there and not any infill. And so we saw how that really did impact the business in those places. So we purposely excluded that one. All right, with that, what we basically learned from the study was, I didn't put any conclusions here, is that there's really not a whole lot of change in perception before and after for businesses, except what appears to be those local customers, especially those one-owner customers. If they're already teetering, and you're getting ready to ask them to go through some type of work zone rehabilitation on the road, putting in a raised median, they're the ones that are going to give you the problem, and they're not going to weather that work zone very quickly. So the quicker you can get in and out, the less problem you're typically going to have. So I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, when you think about it. We saw it looking at the data, but it didn't really hit us until after the fact that really was an issue. And that is really it. That's exactly what he said, the gentleman said yesterday from the gas station owner. Those local one-person owners especially, or even if they just have a couple businesses, that is their livelihood. And when you impact that directly for 6 months to a year and their revenue is going out the door, that's an issue, and they might not weather it. And so that was kind of the lesson learned through that. Get in, get out quickly, and then after the fact, people will recognize the benefit. So I'll take questions.
Miles is unreasonable for the U-turn. Was there any evaluation on what distance was kind of the breaking point of away from your U-turn?
Yeah, so the question was there any evaluation done on the distance, the reasonable distance to go to be able to U-turn in this case, or something to that effect, to come back to a business? And the answer is no to that, because almost every facility we looked at, with the exception of that one, had signals littered down the arterial, quarter mile or less. I mean, they were very tight. That Market Street example was a good one. Or a U-turn opportunity was very close by, within 1,000 feet usually of the nearest signal. So the answer to that is no. We actually did try to take a look at some of the businesses and how close they were to the intersection, whether or not they were on the inbound or outbound side, and we really just couldn't tell anything from that because there was such a litter. And different gas stations, for instance, that's a big one. Their destination or type locations. The gentleman mentioned that yesterday. It really depends on what it is their customer focus is. The gentleman mentioned that yesterday too. It's really important for them to be on the outbound side because they're going to serve eggs and milk and all those kind of things. A Sheetz operates differently than the Hess that was revitalized on top of a shell that was put there 40 years ago. The access is very different. And so it was really nearly impossible to tease those types of things out.
I'm interested in the methodological problem here, that it seems to me that those streets where you're putting on medians you're responding to issues. That is, this is the growth area. Those without them are the stable to declining areas. How do you find these controls?
So I don't work for the DOT, so I don't know how they're making those decisions. Tony could probably answer that question better than I could, former DOT. I think you were on our panel too, Tony. But most of the sites that we went to, there were very few that we had to throw out based on one of those conditions for business density. They were already built out. And what we were seeing was, the Walmart, the Lowe's, something that was coming in and pretty much demolishing what was already in place, some old business development, and they'd come in and demolish it and set it up with a few out parcels. And that's when a decision was made, hey, we have an opportunity here to redevelop this roadway, and oh, by the way, Walmart will help pay for it because they're big and they're going to obviously have an impact on our roadway facilities. So we didn't really see a whole lot that were being redeveloped in rural suburban areas, and if they were, we threw them out. I don't think that really answered your question, though, did it?
I'm thinking that that's exactly the kind of place where a one owner, a one location, older enterprise would be going out of business, would be failing relative to the new, more national brands coming in.
Yeah.
And there was your emergence post-project.
Yeah, even while just now doing this presentation, while I'm talking, I was getting flooded with some of the business owners that we met with doing these field surveys. It would be the hardware store that's been there for the last 60 years. Now Lowe's is coming across the street. And you're getting ready to redevelop it, and they're going to have to weather this work zone. They were the ones that were having to make a decision, to sell their business. it was kind of that next little nick in the card, if you will, that said, you know, I'm putting myself in their shoes, obviously. You know, they're already wondering what they should do, and now you're going to come in here and tear the road up for the next year. I just don't know if I can weather that. You know, so they're having to make those types of decisions.
Is your report available on the website from ITRE and from NCDOT?
The NCDOT is the best place to get our reports. So if you go to if you just Googled NCDOT economic impacts of business, it would pop right up on probably the first search.
Chris, if you were going to set this up and had time for your before studies and all, how would you go at it now? If you could do maybe even a larger type effort, what would you try to accomplish if you were able to hit it again?
Yeah, I think I would do it the exact same way. I just literally would get the before data. The survey I felt like was set up very well, where we really tried not to bias them and get what their economic impacts were and have kind of a baseline condition that they were both operating under. So I think we would do it exact same way. I don't think we would really change up the survey very much at all.